trainers will never allow you to lose body fat from your stomach. There's no sort of specific science related to this. Hello and welcome to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah here. Today I'm going to be discussing specifically fitness industry trends and why we need to lose them. I am going to do a bit of a deep dive into specific topics of industry trends that we may have seen, and I'm sure all of you have seen so far. I did do a previous podcast on fitness and food myths, and I covered a couple of these topics in there, but this is going to specifically focus on trends that I have seen and other coaches have seen that we know are a load of BS. So hopefully this will help you out if you are a client or a person who is simply engaging in their fitness journey and you're feeling a little lost with all of the information. So first off, I'm going to start off with, and just letting you know that this is going to be very freely spoken. The points that I have written down don't have any sort of justification behind them just yet. So I can freely speak about these topics because I've had to do it over and over again. So first off, we have adding resistance bands or booty bands to literally any exercise that you can think of. Unfortunately, this is a trend that I've seen, especially in programming and also even in videos that you see on social media, people just adding bands to everything, to hip thrusts, to squats, deadlifts, adding bands in places they're not even required. You know, if you really think about it, you're not even sure what it's doing. So banding every exercise is not necessary. And weirdly enough, bands have a specific purpose at a specific point in time for a person in their training journey. I would not be using a band for an exercise unless it has been prescribed for you by, for example, a physio, so someone who is very heavily qualified in human movement, or someone who has a high level of expertise in human movement. Bands are, yes, useful for getting particular muscle groups to activate in certain directions of movement, but in essence, they're not something that you should be relying on long term, and certainly at a certain point have no benefit at all. Sometimes can actually teach you poor habits with exercises, becoming reliant upon the band to perform the exercise. Next up, we have wearing waist trainers 24/7. I'm probably going to upset a few gym bunnies with this one. I can't say I've ever worn a waist trainer, and I don't think I would feel very comfortable wearing one. I do believe that waist trainers, and this is definitely a professional standpoint as well, are actually incredibly detrimental to a person's physical health, in that if you research what waist trainers do to your organs long term, it's quite frightening. And there can be lots of issues such as digestive issues arise from using waist trainers. Not only that, people are using waist trainers as a means to shrink their waist. They believe that if they wear a waist trainer whilst they train, hell, even during the day, at any given point in time, that they're just going to end up with less body fat on their stomach. Waist trainers will never allow you to lose body fat from your stomach. There's no sort of specific science related to this. The only process that can occur with waist trainers is going to be that you will eventually, over time, slowly crush your own ribs and your organs inwards. And the ramifications, the health ramifications for that are plentiful. So I have seen women shrink their waists through the standard calorie deficit in a way that doesn't require waist trainer manipulation. And I don't believe that this is a tool that you should be using. You usually see people like IFBB pro athletes, such as Bikini and Wellness, using waist trainers quite often. But in these extreme circumstances, even so, the fat loss result doesn't come from the waist trainer itself. The waist trainer can assist in controlling the stomach so that they can pull the stomach muscles in a little bit tighter without having to work so hard to do so. But it still means the body fat that was there before will still be there. So the calorie deficit is what will allow a person to lose body fat off their waist. I believe that waist trainers are simply just not worth it long term. Ice baths. So these have been doing the rounds in the fitness industry. And interestingly enough, you see people who either sit on the side of full support of an ice bath or completely opposed to. I am on the side where I'm completely opposed to it, but not just me. There's going to be literally hundreds of thousands of fitness professionals who will support the notion that there still to this date hasn't been no ability to perform controlled studies with regards to the impacts of ice baths, whether or not there is any sort of physiological benefit. The only benefit we have seen has been predominantly psychological, which in some sense can be applied to sports, but it is known now commonly that the exposure from ice baths is not long enough to be able to drop a person's body core temperature. So, you're not in there for long enough to even have the impacts of what they're claiming it to be actually work. And even so, icing isn't necessarily going to be beneficial for recovery, in that icing stops blood flow, pauses it, and starts it again. But again, it's very hazy, the information as to why this is even beneficial for recovery in the first place. And we're finding that a lot of the results, because you can't do a controlled, how do you do a blind study with an ice bath? You're in an ice bath. And when we talk science, we talk about blind studies, in that the best way to find out whether or not something works or doesn't work is to blind the person so they don't know that they're receiving the particular stimulus, and then have a control group that isn't. And basically you don't tell them what's going on. You don't even tell them what study they're a part of. So with ice baths, you can't do that. You're in an ice bath, you're in an ice bath. And so we do see a lot of false readings of placebo effects from ice baths, which again, because they've taken the fitness industry by storm, people have jumped on the bandwagon with it. People literally spend, hundreds of dollars on ice baths with this belief that they are benefiting their recovery. And still the information is just too hazy to be able to make any sort of rash claims around this particular type of recovery method. Training for 3+ hours, or even more than 2 at a time, unless you are an elite level athlete, and I wouldn't consider yourself to be one unless you're being paid to be one, but unless you're an elite level athlete, such as a soccer player in an Australian team, or a basketballer in an Australian team, or anything like that, for example, training for 3 hours or even above 2 hours is somewhat pointless towards what most of the general population's goals are going to be, in that more exercise is not always more. We do see issues with recovery, specifically if the diet does not support the exercise, meaning that if you're not eating enough food to fuel those 3 hours of exercise, and that will be predominantly carbohydrates in most cases. And also that recovery, such as even the impacts on adrenal function, for example, and the cumulative fatigue which occurs after this long period of time of exercising, sees that a person actually feels worse than they would feel if they just did a little bit less more consistently. So these really prolonged training sessions, interestingly enough, if we think about calories burnt, our exercise sessions rarely have a larger impact on our total calories burnt for the day in comparison to, for example, our daily normal energy expenditure from non-exercise activity. So things like waving my hands around in front of the camera, my cleaning in the house that I'm not actually thinking about doing purposefully, going for walks, low heart rate exercise, it actually takes up majority of your day. And so those 2 to 3 hours exercising will not. And it doesn't matter how hard you try to push yourself for those 2 to 3 hours, for the remaining time that you're awake, it actually outweighs the amount of time that you are training. And so therefore, what we call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, will actually have a larger role to play. So people who are spending 3 hours in the gym, but sitting on their dot and doing absolutely nothing all day, not getting up and walking around, if you have a fat loss goal, one of the best things you can do is remain more active in your sedentary lifestyle. So within the day, getting up and doing laps, or trying not to park too close to work, for example, like actually pushing yourself to walk a little bit further, will be more beneficial than dragging out your training sessions. And if you've performed a routine fairly efficiently, it shouldn't take you any longer than 1 to 1.5 hours at the most, with rest breaks. So on that note, weird exercise selection for novelty purposes only. So I think this is one that grinds my gears as a coach in the industry who programs specifically for specific goals. But not just that, I see a lot of ridiculous exercises being prescribed with no real justification for them. And then there becomes this expectancy from clients that you are to do the same. So, doing Bulgarian split squats in a very strange way on a strange piece of equipment, making an exercise much harder than it actually needs to be simply because it looks interesting. There is no specific justification for doing this. And in fact, it can often be used again from coaches in the industry as a way of determining a niche. They just look different to other coaches and therefore that makes them better. But doing exercises in a way that makes them difficult, that's too difficult, it shouldn't be that way and it doesn't need to be that way, is actually going to be a detriment and it's not as efficient. So the way I see it is that if you can perform an exercise in a way that achieves the outcome that you want to, so you want to, for example, target your glutes, setting up a complicated piece of equipment. One of the ones I've seen recently that I can't stand is, I think it's like a kickback of some sort where you're sitting down on the bench or you're laying down on a bench underneath the Smith machine and pressing your feet up into the Smith machine bar. I saw someone doing this the other day and I almost wanted to just ask her why. Why? It's a bit rude, but it's an exercise that just doesn't need to be done. There are exercises that can replace this. Standing kickbacks, for example, you can do a banded, kickback as well. But this is just a complicated exercise in a very uncomfortable position, which can be replaced with something a lot simpler, which will be far more effective. No progressive overload with a muscle growth goal. So I've often seen a lot of people going to places like F45, HIIT classes, pump classes, and they're questioning why they're not growing muscle. Why can't I see bigger glutes? Why can't I see, quads developing over time? Why can't I see shoulder caps? And the reality of the matter is that if you can't progressively overload with weights, and if you want to understand what progressive overload, it literally means that progressively overloading the muscle with more weight or reps or resistance each week from the last or each fortnight. But I have seen that, people are questioning why they're not growing muscle, but they're not applying progressive overload because the stimulus is not aligned with the goal. So please, if you want to grow muscle, if you want to develop more muscle density, or you want to see more of that shape there that wasn't there before, and I'm not talking about specifically just definition, but if you want bigger muscle groups, then you will need to engage in progressive overload, and F45 is not for you. Thinking you need to change your training program because you're not seeing results. I see this a lot with beginners, especially coming to me if they have had a coach who changes their training program completely every 4 to 6 weeks, but they haven't actually explained why they do that. At minimum, I think and I believe as a coach, and I think other coaches in the industry would align with me in saying this, especially bodybuilding coaches or body recomposition coaches, if you cannot remain consistent with a stimulus for, at minimum 8 to 12 weeks, you must ask yourself what result you're expecting to see. Because if you constantly change a stimulus, you give yourself next to no chance of progressing with that stimulus. For example, we will use a hip thrust or a bicep curl. So a hip thrust, if you are only performing a hip thrust once a week with a barbell, and you only give yourself an opportunity to do that for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, it's not really allowing you that much progression in the big scheme of things. So progressive overload is ripped out from underneath you. The same with a bicep curl. Of course, if you change the piece of equipment, that would still see that you are still stimulating the muscle in a similar way that you were before. So let's say, for example, you change from, and I know people will probably argue with me on this, but a cable bicep curl to a machine bicep curl. Yes, there will be differences as to where the resistance is applied, but in the big scheme of things, it's a similar movement pattern. And yes, you may see some progression translate from one exercise to the other if you were to then return to a similar exercise again, let's say in another block. However, the purpose for doing this is somewhat obsolete. There is no particular justification for changing an exercise over, especially even pieces of equipment, especially if it's working properly for you. So if you're getting growth, development, strength increases, you're not injured, it doesn't feel like you're getting a niggle coming from that particular exercise, it's comfortable for you, there should be absolutely no reason as to why you are changing that exercise every 4 to 6 weeks. And again, you can somewhat stifle your progression by doing so. Excessive fancy programming for menstrual cycle syncing. I'm probably going to piss some people off with this one as well. Again, another method used by coaches in the industry to establish a niche or difference between them and other coaches. I've seen this more specifically with coaches who have not done significant study into nutrition. And I see this a lot with coaches who do really focus on training niches. If they haven't done deep dive study into nutrition, if they don't have specific nutrition qualifications, registration insurance, and they will go down this weird rabbit hole with training, almost to the point where they make it too complicated. And they convince the client that their training needs to be that complicated. Whereby we see though with training, especially with fat loss goals, that the contribution to total calories burnt for the day, as I mentioned previously, can be as little as 5% and up to 15%, but less likely so for gen population. So these tiny micro changes you're making in your training, the major benefits you will see will be things like injury prevention, which you should have programmed into your program already with the movement patterns, and of what your coach has programmed for you. But excessive fancy programming for menstrual cycle syncing, you see that sometimes, and this has usually just been, I guess falsely educated to coaches in the industry, but whereby there's this belief that you have to do a particularly different type of exercise from week to week. So, 1 week might have to be high intensity HIIT training, and another one is more like yoga, and then another one is resistance training, and then maybe the next week is, walking and recovery or something like that. I mean, if you think about it, changing your training every week, again, is not allowing you, if you're looking at body recomp, if you're looking at lifestyle and you think to yourself, I just want to exercise for enjoyment and just for my health, and you've got to that stage in your life where, you don't need to keep control of your body composition and you don't particularly care about it either, by all means, trying different types of exercise might be incredibly beneficial for your cardiovascular health, for your mobility, for your stability. But this connotation that you can't do just resistance-based training, so weights-based training alone in a program through your phases of your menstrual cycle is absolute bollocks. And the very simple way of managing resistance training, if you are focusing on body recomp, if you're a bodybuilder, or if you're just literally looking at, as I said, body recomp is like changing your body's composition, sculpting your body in ways where you are more confident with yourself. And it is honestly the goal for majority of gen population is going to be fat loss and some lean muscle tissue gain. But if you're looking at doing this, it is entirely possible for you to engage in resistance or weights-based training all the way through your cycle. But it is more a case of RIR and RPE scales, which are industry terminology for representing this idea that you reduce your effort that you put in when you are due for your period, and that you do not try to hit PBs or be a hero and go and lift the heaviest weight that you could ever lift when you are in, for example, your luteal phase or you have your period. This will differ from person to person as to what they can tolerate, but the reason why is when you go through your luteal phase, even though you do have some estrogen battling the high progesterone, so we do have a little spike in estrogen, but it's just not quite enough to allow for lubrication of the joints, and we are more injury prone. Okay, so there are particular times of your cycle where you're more injury prone. And this is why, pushing yourself to your max and overexerting yourself when you are due for your period, or possibly in the first few days of your period, and sometimes all the way through for some people, is not feasible and is not going to be sustainable for prevention of fatigue. So you can still follow your normal programming, just with a lesser effort leading into your cycle. And it really is that simple. It doesn't have to be something that a coach can specialize in, and the specialty in doing so is actually putting the control into the client's hand and educating them in how to do this successfully. The next point, staying on the same weights. Oh, this is a sad one. It's sad in a sense, and this is not making fun of. Sad because I'm sad women are still doing this to themselves, but staying on the same weights for months or even years on end, or only doing bodyweight exercises to avoid getting too bulky. I mean, coming from somebody who is as muscular as you get, I guess, in natural female bodybuilding, there are women who are, yes, if you see them on the internet, a lot more jacked than I am, but they'll most likely be taking substances. I've rarely met women more muscular than me, and I'm not saying this to blow my own horn, but I've rarely met women more muscular than me in the industry who are not using substances of some sort. That's okay. It's obviously their choice to do so, but I'm a person who tries. I try to get as much muscle as possible. So I'm like the limit. I'm like unless you want to start getting crazy and going down the path of taking PEDs, but this fear of getting too bulky and sticking to your 2 kilo shoulder press and then wondering why you're still not seeing any definition is just an absolute repetitive cycle, I believe, that unfortunately is perpetuated by other women. You see a lot of fitness influencers out there that have their shitty little 1 to 2 kilo dumbbells and they're running around like mad chooks, and you wonder why they're straight up and down, why they don't have the ability to grow as much muscle. And don't get me wrong, if that's the look you want to go for, if you would like to look like a marathon runner, or if you want to look lean and long and slender, I actually don't have any issue with clients wanting to do that. But if you're coming to me and you're wanting to grow your glutes, get some shoulder caps, create more of an X shape and an X frame, get broader lats to do that, to help you out with that, feel stronger, etc., please don't expect to do so by staying on the same weights for years or months on end, or specifically doing bodyweight exercises because you're afraid of what dumbbells are going to do to you, or even any weighted exercises are going to do to you. Please stop looking at the most muscular women in the industry as an example of what weights training does, because you're kidding yourself if you think that that is what's going to happen for you overnight or at all. It's actually really hard to do. So, trying to spot lose body fat with specific exercises, targeting that area, such as side planks for your hip dips, or sit-ups to see ab definition. Unfortunately, there is no way to spot lose body fat. I've said this a few times in podcasts before. Please stop trying to do that. Running on the spot to try and lose cellulite off your legs, or hip thrusts, for example, it's not going to make you lose body fat off your bum. Doing bicep curls won't make you lose body fat off your arms. What engaging muscle groups does, if you really think about this, it actually just uses the muscle group that exists or may not exist as much. But it basically tears the muscles on a micro level, and the protein you consume repairs that muscle later and helps to build it. And that is what allows you to see definition popping out from the skin, along with body fat loss. However, body fat loss is something that's determined by whether or not you are consuming calories in a deficit, so eating food at a level which ensures that your body is relying on body fat stores as an energy source, which is why you have to have calculated nutrition. But not just that, we genetically store in different areas, okay? Every single person has a genetic roadmap as to where they store body fat. Yes, this can change over time with age specifically, but less so than what your standard genetics already are. In that, I store a lot of body fat around my glutes and my hamstrings, or at just the tops of my legs. I don't store as much around my waist and my hips. So that's just me naturally. I don't have a lot of body fat on my waist. However, obviously, if I let myself go far enough with things and increasing body fat, it probably would eventually start to go on my waist. So spot loss is not a thing. It never has been. Doing sit-ups will not give you abs. it will strengthen the muscle underneath the fat, but being able to see abdominal definition relies upon losing body fat. And no, you cannot specifically lose it from that area doing any particular type of exercise or taking any particular type of supplement for that matter. Okay, moving on. Removing the yolk from egg instead of eating the yolks from at least 2 eggs, I'm going to say daily. So if you're just eating egg whites and not eating whole eggs, this isn't for those who, for example, eat 2 eggs or 3 eggs, let's say, and then they add egg whites on top of that. That's fine. If you don't want all of the fats from all of the eggs, that's okay. If you have a calorie count, you will likely have a fat limit, which is when we know yolks are a little bit higher in fats. However, the yolk is also very high in protein and good cholesterol. So there are many benefits to eating your egg yolks as opposed to throwing them out. My recommendation would be to obviously, within your fats goal for the day, still allow for, when consuming eggs, still allow for 1 or 2 yolks, if not 3, as I said, depending on how much room you've got with your calories and fats. But don't just get rid of the yolks just because you think they're bad for you. There is, again, no scientific evidence in the nutrition realm to support this notion. Getting lean for summer. I hate to say this, but it's something that I commonly see as winter comes in, people kind of give up on their goals because of all things, the temperature. And because they're not going to be seen by random strangers in a bikini anytime soon. Ludicrous. I have a lot of people come to me roughly around, I'm going to say October, November, as it starts to get warmer in Australia, saying that they would like to get leaner for summer. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't actually leave you very much time, with summer commencing in December. So the purpose of doing this is generally because, a lot of women and men want to look their best in bikinis or board shorts or budgie smugglers on the beach. And the unfortunate truth of it is that this is just breeding this idea that you want to get lean and look lean for strangers, people you don't even know. And not just that, but you're also trying to, in Australia, stay lean and get lean across a period of time where you're going to be navigating Christmas, New Year's, and eventually moving into Easter as you come out of summer, which, as we know, sees us engaging in a lot of social occasions. So sometimes people will get so excited about getting lean for summer, they're not actually really thinking about why. Why do I want to be lean for summer? And why am I using this as a motivator? Why am I using a season and being in a bikini on a beach a handful of times as a motivator for getting leaner? My advice to you is, if you ever have a moment in life where you want to increase your confidence, change your body composition, and work on your health, that the best time to start is now. No matter what season it is, whether it's winter or summer, no matter where you are, what time zone, what season across the world, that getting lean for summer is just another fad. And companies will buy into it. Don't get me wrong, probably a couple times I put into a caption, do you want to get lean for summer? Simply because I know that people will find that as a motivational line to get their ass into gear. Most of the time though, there's a lot of work to be done, and it's not just the motivation of getting lean for summer, but changing habits and lifestyle choices at the root cause of the problem. Detoxing. My goodness, this is everywhere. And it just won't go away. I have never done a detox in my whole life. Never done a detox. Detoxing is honestly a part of the supplement and fitness industry that needs to die and stay dead. Detoxing is a personal hate as a coach. I guess a topic, in that supplements that are sold to you generally promise that the detox is going to help you with fat loss, that it's going to repair your gut health, and that after the detox, everything's going to be amazing and your skin's going to glow and all of the above. The unfortunate truth is that detoxing is a myth, and the best way to, in quotation marks, detox your body would simply be to increase your fruit and vegetable intake and look at your overall vitamin and mineral content of your diet. Okay, so most of the time when people think they have to detox because they feel bloated and sluggish, there are some simple changes they can make to their diet, such as increasing their water intake, pure water intake, increasing their fruits and vegetables, plus increasing the variety of fruits and vegetables they consume, and increasing the amount as well, not just believing that, a bite of a cucumber is going to cover that base for the day. There is no magical reason why, for that matter, cucumber and lemon in water is going to do anything for detoxing your system. Simply eat the cucumber. If you want to put lemon on your salad, you can, I guess. And drink the water. There is no magical supplement that will detox your body either. Often, these supplements will actually have side effects such as diarrhea, which will make you think that your bloating will be reduced and that you have cleansed yourself. But all it's doing is irritating your gut lining. And even with some supplements which will contain prebiotics and probiotics, yes, there are some benefits to taking prebiotics and probiotics, but you shouldn't become reliant upon them, because the best thing you can do for restoring your own gut health again is increasing fruits and vegetable intake, drinking enough water, getting enough sleep, as boring as that sounds. So please stop wasting your money on detoxes, juice cleansers. I swear to God, if I see another one of these, and luckily I don't see them advertised to me very much, but please stop jumping on the bandwagon with it, as fitness professionals and as nutritionists we're telling you to stop. Okay, working out every day without taking rest days, toxic fitness culture. Certainly I think probably more prevalent for those who have anxiety, depression, and who are using excessive exercise to cope with such. Also, this notion that constantly exercising without rest days is actually going to see you get better results. And unfortunately, I've seen quite a few people struggle taking rest days because they feel lazy, they feel sluggish, or they feel like they're going to get fat, which could be further from the truth. It makes no sense. Rest days serve a purpose in that they allow your body to fully recover from your sessions. And as I've spoken about in previous podcasts, cumulative fatigue is very real. And if without taking at least one rest day a week off from training, you will find your body burn out fairly quickly. There's a reason why if you're training every single day, whether it is doing resistance training sessions and running on your rest days, you will find that you are going to feel awful pretty quickly, and you shouldn't normalize the idea of this. Training like a powerlifter, even though you're not a powerlifter, I have seen probably more so with men than women, people in the gym doing 1 rep maxes, or doing 1 to 4 rep ranges to get strong, and that's okay if that's your only goal, but not actually ever doing a powerlifting competition, not even engaging in powerlifting as a sport, not getting any sort of advice with powerlifting form. So this type of trend, unfortunately, is an ego-based trend and needs to stop, because no one cares. No one cares how heavy you can lift. Genuinely, you are the only person in the room who cares the most about how you can lift. Unless it's a competition between you and your gym bro, in which case he is the only person other than you in the room who cares. Lifting shoes when you're not a professional powerlifter. Please stop spending hundreds of dollars on lifting shoes. If you're not professionally powerlifting or doing this as a full-time sport, there is literally no point in you doing this. You don't need them. Deloading every 6 weeks without fail just because it's pre-planned. I think deloads have become more of a phenomena in coaching protocol of late, because a lot of the time coaches will use deloads again as another niche that separates them from other coaches, in that a person might sign up with them and say, oh, when was the last time you took a deload? And they've said never. Or, haven't thought about the fact that they got sick or they got injured, they took time off training, and that's technically a deload. But I have seen coaches in the industry just giving pre-planned deloads every 6 weeks without fail. And their clients are taking them, and they're not fatigued, they're not even close to fatigued, and they don't even know why they're taking the deload. Don't get me wrong, deloads are fantastic. I do think pre-planned deloads of a longer duration are probably a better idea. For example, if a client hasn't taken a deload in 10 or 12 weeks, the client is checking in and saying, look, I'm feeling exhausted. I don't want to go to my training sessions. There are lots of signs that a client requires a deload, whereby that would be the smartest place to put one. Or, for example, when a client is sick or becomes injured or there's a niggle that just won't go away, often a deload can be administered in a way that actually helps to manage and prevent that particular problem. So, funnily enough, when you get sick and you take time off training, don't feel guilty for it. Your body probably needed it. Continuing to do an exercise that doesn't feel right just because your coach programmed it. If you're a client of mine and this ever happens and I've programmed an exercise for you and you just think this is really uncomfortable and I don't know how to do this properly, please message me. It isn't something that I believe that, I'm not a dictator. I'm not a coach that just programs exercises and I don't just say do it even though it's terrible and you hate it. Yes and no. I think that if you dislike an exercise because you're not quite good enough at it yet, there's always a chance for you to get better. And I've seen more often than not with a lot of clients that do that start out with an exercise. I'll use Bulgarian split squats as a great example, and they can't stand it because they struggle with it. If I work closely enough with them and I'm improving the form for that exercise, and that's what I do, I can do that online. It's not impossible. Yes, I cover all bases. I'm a PT, I'm a nutritionist, I'm also a mindset coach. But I believe that if a person is, for example, if you're doing a conventional deadlift, and we all know conventional stance, straight out in front, versus a sumo deadlift with your legs a little bit wider. Let's say you're doing a conventional and the conventional is just not comfortable and you know that when you do a sumo that you have a much better time with that particular exercise. Or let's say deadlifts have never gotten along with you and for some reason you haven't quite got it right. A couple of options here. You can change from a conventional to a sumo or from a sumo to a conventional. Different people have different hip structures, different lengths of their femur, for example, and different movement patterns. It would be silly of me to assume that every single person is exactly the same, but we don't have all of this information when we start with a client. So if your coach says to you, you have to keep doing this exercise, even though time and time again, you've tried to do it the way they've asked you to, you've tried to perfect your form, or even then something like a variation. So for me, dumbbell Bulgarian split squats. Unfortunately, the dumbbells are too heavy for me now, even with wraps, so I have to do them on a Smith machine. If I was then told that I have to suck it up and do it with dumbbells, I would simply be in a position where I would go and do the Smith machine anyway. So I don't believe that a coach should be telling you that you have to do a particular exercise if continuously you have tried, attempted, and it just doesn't agree with you. Thinking you have to do cardio on top of your weights to keep you lean while you grow. It's an interesting one. I think I've probably seen this more so with women than men, in that they have this fear of not doing cardio when going into a growth phase, so trying to grow a little bit more muscle. And sometimes their steps are through the roof, and I haven't asked them to do that many steps. Sometimes they'll jump on the Stairmaster or skip or do the bike or any other form of cardio because they don't think they've burnt enough calories in their workout and they still have this headspace for fat loss only, The unfortunate problem with this is that it then means that you're taking away a lot of the energy that you could be applying to your workouts. So carbohydrates stored as energy or glycogen that you could be using for the next day's workouts, and you're using it for cardio-based activity. If your goal is to increase cardio-based fitness, cardiovascular fitness to be increased for whatever purpose, for a team sport, just for your own general health and well-being, if you're not a bodybuilder, that's fine, it's okay. But cardio every day is not necessary, okay, purposeful cardio. It would be more a case of, and even with those who are training for marathon runs, they don't run every day. They usually run alternative days, or they have a limit on their runs per week. So when you want to progress with muscle growth, but you want to stay lean while doing so, unfortunately those two particular types of practices do not go hand in hand unless you're taking illicit substances. And the reason why is that, and I hate this for women because obviously for women they don't understand this, but we have to sit at a slightly higher body fat for our homeostasis to be achieved. Homeostasis is a balance of hormones, menstrual cycle, a comfortable place where your body is quite happy to function at its best. And we don't see muscle growth being at higher levels when an athlete, or a female athlete specifically, is at lower body fat, right? And men, there'll be a certain point where their body fat is too low to gain a significant amount of muscle as well. So it will take you a very long time if you're going to try and smash yourself with bike or Stairmaster or add cardio in on top of your weights to keep you lean while you grow. Unfortunately, you will be fighting a losing battle. And even so myself, I'm fully transparent with this. When I do go through growth phases and I am looking at gaining a significant amount of muscle, my steps are reduced, or even so, I don't purposely try and do steps. So it'll be less than 5,000 a day, which is obviously not very much. I still go for walks and things, and I do obviously pick that up across the weekend and stuff like that. But I actually then can use my steps. When I do want to go into a fat loss phase, I can just use my steps, take them up to 10,000, and they're actually more efficient because my body, wasn't adapted to that high level of activity. So I prefer to use my food, and I like to do this with clients as well. I like to use my food for my specific type of training that I have a specific type of goal for. And if you have conflicting goals where it's, don't get me wrong, yes, you can grow some muscle and still do cardiovascular-based activities, but there's a specific way that we need to do this, in that you would need to alternate them or have them very far apart from each other in the day. So cardiovascular activity would have to be in the morning and your training session would have to be at night, and you would have to refuel between those two sessions. So, but unfortunately, going and doing cardio after your weights training session will then see that you have less glycogen for the following day's training session, and your strength can sometimes be stifled as a result. When you're in something like comp prep, for example, if you are getting a little bit of cardio added to your program, which doesn't often happen with me specifically because I don't like to rely on it, in this case, you're not looking at growing much muscle because you've already grown the muscle, hopefully, in your off season. But even for Gen Pop as well, if I do give you a resistance-based training session and you keep begging me for cardio because you want to stay lean whilst you've got a goal to grow your muscle, you probably have to think about which goal you actually want to go with. And also, where doing more cardiovascular-based activity is going to take your physique. So whether or not you will end up with the exact look that you're wanting. And if you're willing to understand that increasing cardio will then actually see an increase in type 1 muscle fibers, which don't take up as much room as what type 2 do. So, you will have a different look, and it's going to be more of that. And sometimes you can have a hybrid, you can have a half-half. But if your major goal is to grow a significant amount of mass and muscle, unfortunately, using cardio in larger amounts or even to match your weights training is not going to be a benefit. So, knee sleeves, when you don't actually need them. I had someone ask me recently, and I don't see that there's any harm in doing so, but whether or not they should wear knee sleeves even though they don't have knee pain. They cost money. I personally wouldn't. I don't wear knee sleeves myself. I don't necessarily I don't necessarily think that means that everyone has to do what I do, but by the same token, unless you are a CrossFitter, a powerlifter, and unless you have existing knee issues whereby a physio has said, hey, look, I think you need to wear knee sleeves. No. Please don't wear knee sleeves for the sake of just wearing knee sleeves. Yes, somewhat as a preventative for heavier exercises. But again, if you are reliant upon knee sleeves, sometimes the surrounding muscles are not going to be doing what they need to be doing. And unfortunately, you can see the reverse occur of what you wanted to do in the first place. So they are something that assists you. And I feel this way about weight belts as well. I use weight belts for all of my leg work because I have a back injury that has been recurring. Thankfully, I haven't actually injured it in 2.5 years. And that's because I've been doing a lot of my rehab and mobility work and getting a lot of massage, sports massage. It's improved it greatly. And obviously getting better with the exercises and improving form. But wearing a weight belt for every session for every exercise is pointless. You don't need to wear a weight belt for every single exercise. Wearing a weight belt for bicep curls, it makes no sense. If you're doing bicep curls that heavy that you're swinging at the waist, you need to drop the weight or sit down. So please don't wear a weight belt for absolutely every exercise. It's probably just going to be the exercises in which that you do need core tummy support and that you need to support your lower back as well. So it's mostly going to be those hip hinge exercises for, say, legs. Wearing a jumper to make you sweat more and burn more fat. I have to pause for this one. Wearing a jumper to make you sweat more will make you sweat more, but will not make you burn more fat. We do see that calories are expended mostly as heat from the body, okay, so energy. However, increasing your core body temperature doesn't necessarily guarantee, and it doesn't guarantee that you're going to burn more calories. Exercise does, right? So, and your metabolic rate, your resting metabolic rate will determine your heart rate, right? So when we talk about burning calories, obviously exercise has a role to play in that. But if you think about it, putting a piece of clothing on you to make you hotter doesn't do anything for increasing energy burned. It just makes you hotter. If anything, it's actually dangerous because it then can increase chances of dehydration, poor performance, and in some cases with dehydration, excessive dehydration, death. So not saying that wearing a jumper while you train will make you die. You're not going to drop dead from doing that. But certainly that if you're doing it to burn more calories, please stop doing that. Just wear a singlet, let yourself breathe. In fact, we actually see more benefit to having adequately aired clothing, so where you can actually get proper ventilation for cooling the body, and then as a result you actually see a benefit to performance because your body is more likely then to be able to continue to perform when you don't have to replenish as much water as well. And hydration, unfortunately, is something that a lot of people neglect. So becoming dehydrated in your session wearing a heavy jumper is ludicrous. Expecting to build your perfect physique in 8 weeks or even 6 months, it's not realistic, okay? A lot of the stuff you see online too, where people start an 8-week challenge, they're kind of in a position where they're posed to the side and their belly's blown out or they're not tensing. Imagine too, when someone starts an 8-week challenge, they're probably not feeling very good about themselves. And in the next 8 weeks, they're feeling great about themselves. They might be tensing, they might have learned a few poses, better lighting. But either way, it is a bit of trickery in that sometimes you'll be believing that it's possible to do in 8 weeks is to completely transform your body. And the reality of the fact is that it isn't. No matter how fast or hard you go, only a certain amount of effort can be put in across 8 weeks and results can be achieved, because humanly possible is a terminology that refers to what is humanly possible, right? And we can't perform miracles for ourselves or for other people. So can you achieve great results in 8 weeks? Absolutely. Can you achieve a miracle in 8 weeks? Absolutely not. 6 months is still not going to be enough time. I think a lot of people think about a timeline because they say to me, how long will it take until I see results? And I ask them the question, how long are you willing to be adherent for, or consistent for, or stick to the plan for, or change your lifestyle for? And do you see an end to this? Because the matter of the fact is, it is a lifestyle change. It really is. It's not something that you just do for 8 weeks or 6 months. I've never seen a person engage in 8 weeks or 6 months worth of training and nutrition changes to their lifestyle and then drop it all and go back to what they were doing and still sustain their results. That's the whole point. Please stop buying into this idea that it's going to take a short amount of time. And also, instead of becoming impatient with that, maybe understand that instead of looking at how long it takes, look at changing your lifestyle so that you no longer live it the way that you currently do. And it won't matter how long it takes, because it's literally the new way. It's the way I live and breathe now. So it's not something for me that I don't think to myself, where am I in 2 years? Am I going to be where I want to be physically? Am I going to be there in 6 months? I just continue ticking the boxes and working away at it. And I don't think twice about how long it takes. It is my life. And it is easy to sustain once you get there. Once you've educated yourself or you've got someone on your side educating you, isn't something that is actually that hard. It doesn't need to be that complicated. In the beginning, absolutely, everything is harder than it would be towards the end where you know what you're doing. But, if you've got a great coach on your side, they can actually simplify it. They can take away all this complicated bullshit that you don't need to and shouldn't be partaking in because you believe it is an easy way out. Having a goal to look exactly like a fitness influencer on social media. If you currently have someone as your background picture on your phone that is not you, or that is not a quote of some sort driving you forward, or maybe anything other than a person. I used to be that person who had famous influencers like Emily Skye, Paige Hathaway. They were my Fitsbos back in the day. They're now mummers, and I'm still very much inspired by them. They were my background picture. Currently on my laptop, my background picture is my team. I don't want to look like any of them, but they inspire me and they mean a lot to me. And my background picture on my phone is my partner. And I don't want to look like him. He just is an important person in my life, and he reminds me of my why and why I show up every day. And he is a person who picks me up when I'm not feeling great. But I guess the point of this is that if you have a goal to look like someone on social media that you follow, you don't even know the background of their story, or they take their photos in the most flattering light. You don't know how long it's taken them to get to where they are. You don't even know whether they're taking substances to get there. And even if they are, especially if they're taking substances to get to that point, like PEDs, you shouldn't have a goal to look like them, because unfortunately you would have to do the same in order to get even a similar result. And not just that, they're not posting every single second of their day, the dedication to their diet, their exercise, etc. And having a goal to look like someone else is the most unrealistic goal to have, because you aren't that person. You don't have the same frame, the same structure, the same genetics, and you don't have their story. You don't have, they may even do this as a full-time job. I'm a coach. Honestly, it is much easier for me to sustain, or even so, probably a bit more pressure on me to sustain a physique or a lifestyle that aligns with my work, because it's my work. But, for yourself, maybe you may not be involved in the fitness industry, and there may be less pressure and I guess less of an expectancy to do so, and that might give you an excuse not to. So when you've got a goal to look like a social media influencer, remember that they are one out of billions that are their own individual self. They are unique, and that looking like them will only leave you, or trying to look like them will only leave you miserable, because I've never seen someone be able to clone another person and mold them into themselves, ever. Following someone else's diet you've seen on social media because you want to look like them. I think once I've done a day on my plate, I think it was just because I was promoting the supplement sponsors I'm sponsored by, just for their protein powder, because I do definitely endorse adding protein powder to the diet if you are not getting enough through your whole foods to meet your target. But in saying that, I don't want anyone eating exactly what I'm eating for the day. And I guess this is partially why meal planning frustrates me as well, because coaches who design meal plans for clients will often give them the food that they eat. I do like it if they do audit their diary first and see before planning their diary for them. But I don't think that you should be following a diet of a person because you want to look like them on social media. I mean, that makes no sense either. Yes, we are what we eat, but just because that person eats only fruit, for example, doesn't mean that you're going to end up with their body tomorrow, 6 months, or even a year from now. So eating their diet, their protein oat recipe in the morning and their exact lunch and their snacks as well, that calorie count is going to be specific to them, their height, weight, sex, age, and all of the above, their own activity levels, etc. And you don't have all of that information either. So again, it's not even individualized nutrition. It's actually pointless as to why someone would put their diet on social media to share with other people to copy. Eliminating food groups because someone with 1 million followers and no formal qualifications doing it. I had a chat to someone the other day about this, and actually, to be honest, it's quite often, more often than I would like, but whereby they're following some fitfluencer who, I don't know, only eats raw meat, or I've seen some doozies, doesn't eat any packaged foods at all, only eats fruit, doesn't eat any fruits and vegetables. I find it fascinating that there's people who have millions of followers on both sides of the fence, still, somehow, but they have no qualifications. I mean, like, if you look at their bio or their website or their links or whatever, there's no mention of qualifications. None. Nothing. Even in their blogs, their vlogs, nothing. They say nothing about where they got their university degree, where they even came up with this nonsense. And, you know, they may have pulled some very biased information from very concentrated, tiny little studies that may not have even made their way into peer review. And this is what they've made maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars off, or they have made millions of followers from, because it is a hype. It is a culture that they can get people to buy into because it is exciting and new and different. So please stop eliminating food groups because someone else doing it with a large following, or just someone else is doing it and swearing by it. Because unfortunately this can then lead to micronutrient deficiencies and serious illnesses and risks long term. Please just listen to qualified nutritionists. It may be boring, okay? You may think to yourself, oh, this doesn't sound too different to what other nutritionists have said. That's a really good thing. There is a reason for that. We align because our education aligns, because the education exists for a reason. If you go to university and you get a law degree, that's a law degree, right? And so you're not going to argue with a lawyer and say, well, you know, I understand the law more than you do. Some fitfluencer, you know, or someone on social media isn't going to turn around and say, do you know what? Even though you've got a law degree, I think I know the law better than you do. I honestly think I could represent myself in court. But people do it with nutrition. It's like, the more time I spend in the industry, the more I see it slaughtered and insulted and walked all over. Nutrition is almost, for those who are not qualified, an absolute fucking joke. And it becomes frustrating on the behalf of those who are qualified, is because we've sat there with the textbooks, we've been in the lectures, we have in-depth, you know, looked over scientific studies, you know, control group studies, where it's not biased, where we're not putting across our personal beliefs. And so please understand that there is absolutely no reason why you should be getting behind a person who is not qualified with regards to nutrition advice. And not even recently qualified as well. If they got their nutrition qualifications 10, 11 years ago, do your research. Again, they're not going to be up to date or up to scratch with the changing science. And nutrition is one of the changing sciences. Science is ever changing in general. Thinking you have to cut out processed foods entirely to reach your goals, on that note, there's a lot of old school bodybuilding coaches out there that still seem to preach this method, and somewhat of late I've seen it happening far too frequently. All this does is breed this idea to you that you are not going to be able to live a normal lifestyle and sustain your results or even get any. Okay? You do not have to, and I've said this so many times, you do not have to only eat clean or completely avoid packaged foods altogether in order to lose body fat, gain muscle, do anything really, honestly, achieve any sort of nutrition-related goal. You do not need to, and you should not be eating in a way that eliminates either food groups, processed food altogether, sugar, preservatives, the list goes on. Yes, there are going to be certain types of inflammatory responses to an excess of processed foods, mostly saturated fats. I'm going to be honest, to our digestion and certainly to cholesterol. But still to this day, there is no scientific evidence to support that the consumption of sugar makes you gain body fat. It is the excess of calories that does so. So this concept that sugar is the devil, carbohydrates are the devil, processed food is the devil, there is a reason why, as nutritionists and dietitians, we preach a balanced diet, that 80-20%, so 80% whole foods, 20% fun foods, is because we see that this is a far more sustainable approach. And not just that, there is no sort of harm in doing so. There's been plenty of studies to support it that, that this particular, and I believe it's less than 10% of total saturated fats needs to be less than 10% of total dietary intake daily. So this is just some very basic guidelines. But you even see with marathon runners and sporting athletes is they are consuming sugars. They're consuming little gels. They're consuming lollies. They're consuming, what do you think Powerade and Gatorade is? It's just glucose with added electrolytes. So it is sugar and electrolytes and water. It's ludicrous for an entire industry to deny that, we actually already use processed foods in sporting and in sports performance. I'm doing a postgrad in sports performance at the moment. And it is near impossible to put enough carbohydrates into an athlete who is, performing at such a high level without using some sort of simple sugars, and we definitely should be doing so. Things like juices here and there as well. So to then turn around and say there has to be a completely polar opposite approach in eliminating every type of processed food and only eating clean whole foods for fat loss, because apparently it's just so vastly different. I mean, from sports performance, yes, but also remember that these are all metabolic pathways that occur in the body. So you'd be surprised how much they all tie in and work together. And, cutting food groups out for fat loss is just a waste of your time, and unfortunately breeds an eating disorder on the horizon or a poor relationship with food. You see it time and time again. So buying a supplement because the person's selling it to you says it works. Just think about that statement. If you're buying a supplement from somebody and they tell you it works, but they don't have any qualifications in sports nutrition or dietetics, just ask them, are you a nutritionist? It's really easy. Do you have a nutrition qualification? So what are your qualifications in the field? I know that you work at a sup store, or I know that you work for a sup company. Don't get me wrong. There are certain supplements that I do use, very limited, but certainly some. But I only use the ones that are supported and backed by evidence-based studies in sports nutrition practice. So it's not going to be backed by, Bob, who I met at the gym. Good old Bob. Please don't just buy a supplement because the person selling it to you told you that it works. If you think about it, that's literally buying a car from a salesperson just because they want you to buy the car. There's a benefit to them of you purchasing that supplement. So, ask a sports nutritionist before you then engage in that purchase. Because most of the time, they're quite expensive. And we do see that, a large percentage of supplements in the supplement industry account for completely useless purposes. Rub-on creams and special laser machines to reduce cellulite. Oh man, there are people who've made entire businesses out of this. Wild. It's no coincidence, no matter how many times you've used these creams, these laser machines, or, there's all sorts of things out there now, but physical manipulation or putting a chemical into your skin as an organ is not going to impact adipose tissue in any way at all. Sometimes you can heat up the adipose tissue and it can appear to be slightly softer for a very temporary period of time, and then it just goes back to being exactly what it was previously, which is that hardened version. It's not a thing. Like, again, a calorie deficit fat loss will see that mostly over time a reduction in cellulite will occur, especially if you're sticking to it. It's not going to happen if you don't put the work in. So don't get frustrated if you're not following your diet and you don't see a reduction in cellulite. Literally anything that isn't a calorie deficit to lose body fat, e.g. fat loss supplements, pills, powders, everything. And honestly, anything that says fat loss, yes, there are going to be particular types of mostly illicit substances that can increase metabolic rate considerably enough to burn slightly more body fat. Caffeine is the only one that is legal at the moment. There is a drug called metformin, which is given to diabetics, which is often used in ways it shouldn't be in the fitness industry, and unfortunately given to people who do not have diabetes. But most of the other categories, and I'm just going to say all of them, do not actually burn any body fat at all. L-carnitine supplementation specifically is one that I'll pick on, because in the earlier days we did believe that L-carnitine had some sort of impact on fat loss or increased use of lipids as a fuel source, but we've only seen of recent that is the case in constant everyday supplementation for those who are engaging in high-intensity cardiovascular bouts of exercise, such as marathon runners, for 5 to 6 bouts a week, up to 2 hours. And it doesn't actually necessarily make them burn more body fat in a way that's favourable to body composition goals, but more so from a performance standpoint, in that they are not using up all their carbs, which they would like to save for the end of their race. So it allows the body to basically tap into more adipose tissue as a fuel source earlier on in, say, a marathon. But in saying that, they only saw this with athletes consuming, I believe it was upwards of 160 grams of sugar daily on average, which is quite a lot of sugar. It means the carbs would have to be quite high as well, so their calories would have to be quite high. So again, then trying to use L-carnitine for a Gen Pop fat loss client is pointless. Any type of fad diet, including keto, intermittent fasting, the list goes on. I'm not going to list them all. I'm sick of listing them. To speed up fat loss versus just a calorie deficit with a balanced diet. Again, I don't know why people are chasing keto or why they're chasing intermittent fasting when they could just literally learn how to engage in a calorie deficit with a coach, and obviously rid themselves of this awful process of putting themselves through torture, eating strange food combinations, increasing their fats to ridiculous amounts, and engaging in things like intermittent fasting, even though they really don't enjoy it, because the calorie deficit will replace all of those. The calorie deficit is it's an energy balance thing, right? It's just energy in, energy out, energy in, energy out. We have excess fat stores from energy we've consumed that we haven't used. So then in order to then lose body fat, what do you think you need to do? Consume less energy than what we expend for the day in order for the body to tap into fat stores as a fuel source instead of food. It's just how it works. There's no other sort of fancy way to do it. And there shouldn't be. Cutting calories as low as possible to speed up fat loss. Again, this just leads to binge eating episodes. I've seen it time and time again. I see this quite a lot with women who have a lot of body fat to lose. Weirdly enough, the only people who could even be on a 1,200 calorie diet would be people who weigh next to nothing. So because the less we weigh, the less we actually burn. If I had a 10 kilo backpack on my back today, I would be burning more calories because I'm carrying around more weight, okay? I took the 10 kilo backpack off, I'm going to be burning less calories. So it's just a simple principle of, if we have more weight on our bodies, our metabolic rate will be slightly higher than someone with similar age, sex and height and activity levels daily, who weighs less than us. So we're going to burn more. So we already have that, with more weight on, you already have an increased ability to use more energy. So your desire to reduce your calories super low will actually just see that your hunger hormones will spike through the roof, and inevitably you'll end up binging. And this is obviously counterintuitive to what you're trying to achieve in the first place. So a moderate calorie deficit would be the answer, so that you're not starving and wanting to eat your left arm all day and you end up doing so anyway. Heavy supplementation to replace nutrients from real food. Look, I do see a lot of people, and I don't necessarily think this is going to apply to those who are on very long-standing diets whereby they might need some nutrition supplementation. But people who just take, iron tablets because they're too lazy to eat red meat, or people who are taking vitamin C tablets or magnesium and zinc, but they're just taking like a whole list of vitamins and just not eating vegetables, or not consuming red meats, or not consuming dairy, supplementing calcium. And let's say they're not a vegetarian, or they're not, there's no actual specific reason why, they just can't be bothered, or they don't like the taste of vegetables, is another one I've heard. Unfortunately, this is just another fad and even greens powders, etc., that I see people jumping on the bandwagon with, instead of just eating the vegetables, which will actually have more bioavailable nutrients. Food first, always, with everything that we do as nutritionists, the way we teach our clients as well. dietitians. This is a global standard. This is not just the Mariah Jean Fit way. So that's about it from me. Hopefully you have listened to this entire podcast. If not, well, I guess you wouldn't be listening to this part of it. But if there are any other fitness trends or myths that you'd like me to cover, feel free to swing me an inbox about it, and I'll always be nice and transparent, however sometimes blunt, which I apologise for. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to doing another podcast for you soon. Bye. Waist trainers will never allow you to lose body fat from your stomach. There's no sort of specific science related to this.